I'm fairly familiar with them.
So welcome everyone to our Friday Transportation Seminar here at Portland State University, sponsored by the Center for Transportation Studies. And I'm Robert Bertini. I'm pleased to introduce Thomas Brennan from Nelson Nygaard, who's our speaker today. So we look forward to your presentation. And I always suggest that speakers talk a brief bit about how you got where you are. Since we have a lot of students in the audience, they like to hear your story.
I'd be happy to do that. Am I on camera? Looks good. So topic of the presentation today is private sector innovation in commute transportation. This is what's drawn you all here. I thought I'd spend about the first 40 minutes talking about myself. Just kidding. Again, my name's Tom Brennan. I'm a principal with a firm called Nelson Nygaard Consulting. We're a kind of mid-sized transportation planning firm based out of the Bay Area. We have an office here in Portland, one in Seattle, and a couple offices on the East Coast as well. We're about 70 people in total. We're a little bit different than a lot of our competitors or collaborators because we are solely planners. We don't have engineers on board. We think this gives us kind of a unique perspective because ultimately we can stay objective about the kind of projects we work on and the ultimate outcomes of the planning projects we do, because we're not invested in the kind of construction phase of projects other than trying to bring good benefits to the communities we're working for. Our areas of expertise are transit service planning and transit policy, accessible and specialized transportation, what you might know as paratransit, multimodal transportation. So we work on a lot of big multimodal projects where we're integrating a number of modes, particularly in kind of dense urban downtowns. We do a lot of smart growth. We work on transit-oriented development projects, particularly on access, parking management, and circulation components. We do program management. We do financial planning for most of the modes I've talked about, and integrate public participation in informational programs within that work we do. I myself got into planning, I think kind of via some community development work I'd done in the Peace Corps. Moved to Oregon from the East Coast to go to school at the University of Oregon. Initially was kind of focused on more of a rural economic development track, and got more and more interested in transportation. And actually took a job with Nelson Nygaard pretty much right out of college after doing a little work in the public sector. Started sort of at the bottom of the ladder, and here I am 9 years later, managing our Northwest practice and actually own a share in the firm too, so it's been kind of a wild ride. So that's a little bit about me. What we're going to talk about today is commute transportation. I wanted to start out a little bit just thinking a little bit about what some of the trends in commute transportation are and the demographics in the U.S. that kind of contribute to how we travel and get to work and think about that. The Pew Research Center, you may have seen this in the news, just did a recent poll about where people live. Generally over half our population lives in cities or suburban areas of metropolitan regions in the U.S. We hear a lot these days about the increased desire to live in the center city. We certainly see that happening here in Portland. Interestingly enough, though, when you look at this Pew Research poll, they also ask people what their ideal living situation would be. And more people said they'd like to be living in small towns. More people said they'd like to be living in rural areas. Less people said they'd actually like to be living in cities. So while we see this trend occurring, I think there's also a general pull that continues in the States for people to live in more suburban areas. I don't know if any of you got a chance to see Arthur Nelson. He spoke over at the Convention Center a few months back. Pretty well-known urban demographer in the U.S., but these are some statistics that he showed in his presentation, showing that from 1960 to 2040, over about an 80-year period, expecting a real change in the type of households in the U.S., going from almost 50% households with children in 1960 down to about 33% in 2000, and dipping further to about 26% in 2040. In part, this is the baby boom tide rising, so we've got a lot of older people in single-family households, but also a lot of younger single people, less people getting married. So again, this kind of contributes to people's level of flexibility. We're creating a very flexible society where people aren't necessarily rooted in their home for a long time. They're willing to move home locations and move jobs. So it's not always easy for people to be close to their jobs. Pulling a few statistics from a Brookings Institute survey that was done several years ago now, but I think the trend is relevant. They saw that they surveyed, I think, 20 major metropolitan areas in the U.S., and about 52% of the cities in those metro areas grew jobs, but lost overall market share to the suburbs, which means the suburbs were growing jobs faster. About 25 the cities lost jobs while the suburban areas grew jobs, and only about 20% exceeded job growth in the center city. So, what we've been seeing over the last couple of decades is more and more jobs building in suburban areas rather than the dense urban cores where our transportation systems are focused. And, as we point out, few suburbs actually lost jobs. What does suburban job growth mean for the transportation system? Well, it means a lot poorer transit access. Most of our transit systems are focused radially on the center cities. So people that are living in the center city and commuting out to the suburbs or commuting suburb to suburb generally have much poorer transit quality and connections. It means generally free parking. There aren't a whole lot of disincentives to providing free parking in the suburbs. In fact, that's one of the reasons employers like to locate in the suburbs. And it often means unsafe or intimidating routes for pedestrians. We know our big suburban arterials aren't the ideal places to be walking, and that forces people into their cars. So, a lot of employers are really making this trade-off. So in exchange for some of the benefits they get for siting campuses in the suburbs, which to many of them are great, it means cheap land, it means they can bank land for further expansion, and it means they can kind of create a consolidated corporate campus and really control the work environment of their employees. Again, our average commute distances are about 16 miles, average commute time 26 miles. Not many people are walking 16 miles. Few are biking 16 miles, but not a whole lot either. So that means people are either in transit or in their cars. And we see most people are in their cars. 77% of Americans are still driving alone, or about 102 million people per year. And I'm sure we've been seeing increasing cases of the bike jacker. I think we may have actually had a couple here in Portland, right? So what kind of defines our commute? And I think when we think about it from a policy perspective and a social science perspective, one, we know it's time consuming, right? Probably, or this is statistical, 3% of the average working employee's year goes to commuting. That's a good chunk of time. It's generally non-social. I think there's a lot of argument about whether that's a good or bad thing. A lot of people don't want their commute to be social. A lot of people's ideal commute is quiet and tranquil because that may be the only time that someone's not screaming at them during the day. It's dirty. We're increasingly attentive to our carbon emissions, and statistics show that somewhere in the range of 40% of U.S. carbon production is coming from transportation. Not all of that is commuters, but certainly a chunk of it is. It's generally fairly inactive. You can see depicted in the cartoon here. Study says commuters are fatter. And it's costly. If you think about how we build our transportation systems, generally we build them to accommodate peak demand, and peak demand in large part is caused by commute activities. So by creating auto commutes, we're creating costs for ourselves. Again, we see a lot of advertising that shows happy commuters in their car, and I think our gut reaction was, well, that's just fake. But if you look at the research, it's actually pretty mixed. There's a lot of people that really value their car commute because it's time they can be talking on the phone, it's time they can listen to a book on tape. But I think what really stands out when you dig into the research is that people's happiness with their commute really relates to use of time as much as mode. So some people may find that their auto commute's more friendly than the transit commute because they can talk on the phone or they can do things they might not be able to do on transit. That said, stats show that commuting is pretty stressful as well. HP actually helped fund a study that tracked commuter stress, and some of their findings were pretty interesting. I think they found that some commuters' stress levels and whatever measurements they use were right on par with fighter pilots. So, it does cause a lot of stress as well. So some of the things we're going to talk about today are, what are companies doing to sort of reinvent the commute for their people in a way that will get them to think differently about it and brings value to the commuter as well as the companies. And what they're trying to do is, make the commute productive for people. In some cases, make it social. And I think we'll talk about some of the ways they're making it social are not the ways you expect, not getting people to talk while they're on vehicles, but getting people to interact in different ways in arranging their trips. Making them active, getting people out walking and biking. Sometimes making them optional. The easiest way to cut down vehicle miles traveled is to have people not come to work and work at home sometimes. There's a lot of conscience out there about sort of greening the commute or greening workplaces. So people are interested and companies are interested in reducing carbon emissions. And companies are finding a way to make commute activities contributory to their companies or to other people in need. And why are companies investing in this? Because it's generally costly. One big one being competition for minds. This may be slacking a little bit as the economy does so, but particularly for tech companies, the computer science folks coming out of Stanford were, highly sought after. So any perks that companies could provide to get these people on board were important. The health and happiness of their employees. Employees coming to work, satisfied with their life outside of work are much more likely to be productive. And again, allowing options for people to weigh in on their green conscience as well as the companies to kind of step forward as green leaders. Well, that's nice, but why else are companies investing money? And oftentimes so they can save money themselves. Save money on office space by doing things like flex commuting, having people come in less. Lowering recruitment and retention costs, which are huge cost drivers for big companies. If they can get people to stay on, that's much more cost effective than recruiting 2 or 3 people over the same time frame. Saving on parking costs, as campuses develop, there's a huge cost invested in building parking, particularly structured parking. And saving space for required campus growth. Some places are doing it because it's law. Places like Washington have the commute trip reduction law, which is one of the more toothy laws in the nation. Oregon's got the eco rule. Some individual jurisdictions have their own commute trip reduction laws that employers have to deal with. And finally, I think, as I sort of alluded to, people are thinking and employers are thinking differently about parking. The sort of standard over the last many decades has been, every employee needs a free parking space. But there's some, increasing recognition that that doesn't necessarily need to be the dominant paradigm, and that actually taking away parking and trading that for other things has some value, both for the company in terms of what they can do with their land. They can bank that for office space. They can provide more amenities for the employees, but also realizing that what the employees take away can be value to them as well. So these are some sort of common things that you'd think about in terms of the benefits that companies are providing: transit subsidies, discount off transit passes, subsidies for carpooling or van pooling, ride matching services to hook people up with other carpoolers, preferential parking if you ride with 2 or more people, and guaranteed ride home services so that if someone gets stuck at work, they can take a taxi home. A lot of employers are doing these kind of things. What I want to talk about today are some of the sort of above and beyond ideas. Who are the employers that are kind of pushing the boundary a little bit. And some of those things include commuter bus programs, so employers actually running their own bus services for employees. Enhanced transit, so where when employers are located in places that don't have good transit and the transit agency can't necessarily afford to improve that, actually buying more transit from the transit agency. Company bike programs, where companies are giving out bikes to employees. Shared bike programs, these are the kind of programs that you see in Europe where there's groups of shared bikes that employees or residents can use at their leisure. Integrating transportation with health and benefits programs. Actually investing in public infrastructure that makes it easier and safer to bike and walk to work. Kind of along with that, investing in improving the public realm so it's nicer to walk to work or nicer to bike to work. and actually creating social marketing or social networking around transportation options. So who am I going to talk about today, and who do we know is doing it? Probably recognize a couple of these companies up here. Microsoft, Google, Seattle Children's Hospital, Genentech, and a company called Humana. The three that are kind of in lighter white are clients of ours that we've had sort of direct experience working with. The other two are companies that I've come in contact with through some of our case study research and finding out more about the kind of innovative programs. So I probably know a little bit more about the white programs. What things do they have in common? Well, one, they've all been growing pretty strongly until recently. Again, heavy competition for skilled workers in most of these work sites. They all have suburban offices or relatively suburban offices. Many are in kind of inner-ring suburbs, but none are central city. They're dealing with fairly congested roadways. These are in pretty economically prosperous places that have a lot of congestion. And they're all very focused on corporate image, as you can imagine. But what else do they have in common? One, in most of their programs, they're very interested in incenting people to do things, but very reticent to employ any sort of stick action. So, most of these employers really don't want to go to priced parking. We know pricing parking is a great way to get people to change their behavior. It's probably one of the best. But when you're in a very, competitive market and you're competing for people who could, easily go next door and work for your competitor, you really don't want to create any sort of disincentive to coming to work or working at your site. So a lot of the actions we're talking about here are carrots, and that means they're a lot more expensive than some of the stick actions, because if you were to price parking, you could actually generate revenue through your programs. Rolling out a commuter bus program to your employees, for example, that's very expensive. First case study I want to talk about is Microsoft. Microsoft's up in Redmond, Washington. This is their world headquarters. They have about a 500-acre campus there, somewhere in the range of 12 million square feet of development, over 50,000 employees. So it's a city in and of itself, essentially. And they're growing too. They've been developing quite a bit over the last few years. So they have already a great commute package. They've been award-winning for years. They provide fully subsidized transit passes, the regional flex pass. They have van pool and carpool incentives, financial incentives. They have showers, lockers, towels for bikers and walkers, on-site tune-ups for your bike. It's really a pretty great place to work. But they wanted to go to the next level, so we did some thinking about sort of what's the next great program they could implement. And what's been implemented is something called the Connector Program. It's a regional express bus program. It was designed to focus commute bus service in areas where there wasn't very good public transit service, where there was either no service or people had kind of onerous multi-connection commutes to get to campus. Program was rolled out a couple years ago. It's been a fantastic success. They're providing over 3,000 trips a day now. About 10,000 employees have used the service. It's taken a lot of miles off the regional roadway system. Some of the most congested highways in the Puget Sound lead to Microsoft, so it's been important from a regional perspective as well. And one of the things they're really proud of is that about 70% of the people who are using the service previously drove alone. So we're not borrowing people off public transit, but actually taking people out of their cars and getting them into a more efficient mode. I wouldn't expect you to look at all of this, but this kind of maps out the three phases of the program. It was launched back in September of 2007. It's grown substantially in 3 expansions over that time. They're operating about 44 buses right now on roughly 18 different routes. Estimated, weekly carbon emissions are in pounds are substantial, over 120,000, reducing about 9,000 vehicle trips a week. So it's been a real success in terms of trip reduction. It's also been a real success for the company in terms of corporate image. They spent a lot of time on branding the program. They haven't marketed it externally, but these vehicles driving around the roads of the Puget Sound have basically made it kind of a common name along with the other transit services. So it's provided a great amount of recognition for the company in terms of really doing something green and going above and beyond to serve their employees and take trips off the road. There's kind of two pieces of the service. There's the suburban service on the east side of Lake Washington. Operates basically like a park and ride service. So they have about 8 or 9 park and rides on the east side. And they run these 50-foot Van Hool over-the-road coaches, which are really nice, decked out, comfy seats, onboard Wi-Fi, cup holders, kind of the whole deal. So it's a really nice experience for the passengers. On the Seattle side, we've been forced to operate smaller buses, these 30-foot and some 25-foot buses, because a lot of these routes are penetrating pretty dense urban neighborhoods like Belltown, Capitol Hill, Queen Anne, where it'd be almost impossible at the peak hour to run one of those big 50-footers through. But generally, this same level of amenities, onboard Wi-Fi, are included on these buses. And we talked a little bit about employee productivity. Some of the real strong feedback that we've heard from the users are, isn't it great that we can get some work done on our way to and from work? And being very appreciative of that, freeing up other parts of their lives to spend with their families or do things that they otherwise would have wasted their time commuting on. You can see Microsoft's been a real success in terms of dropping their single occupant vehicle or drive alone rate over the last 4 years or so. And if you look at 2007, they'd already surpassed their 2008 goals for SOV travel, and we're really looking for kind of what's the next big thing we can do to, now that we've picked off the low-hanging fruit, to get the next level up. And a lot of that additional 4% drop down to 62% now, I think, is due to this connector program that they've rolled out. And it's been a big hit for the company as well. Hundreds of articles have been written about it. They've received a number of awards. Probably the only other company in the U.S. that's running kind of a comparable level of bus service is Google from their Mountain View campus. It's a very similar operation in terms of its objectives. They bring people in from areas where there's high employee concentrations around the Bay Area. About 40 pickup locations, over 230 route miles that they serve every day. That's twice the route miles that BART operates. Not that the operation is comparable, but just to give you a perspective. And I think they're actually serving probably well over 1,200 trips a day now. So a very similar program. They've taken a slightly different approach in terms of corporate image. It's a very under the radar program. They run these black cutaway buses that nobody's really supposed to know what they are. So they don't have the flashy corporate image attached. This is really something that's designed for their employees, and the intent is to help employees make better use of their time, but I think also be one of the key perks that Google provides, which are many, as many have probably heard. One of the things that I've heard tell, I've never actually seen it statistically proven, but I've heard from several people that the areas around the Google bus stops have actually seen a substantial bump in real estate prices, at least in the middle part of the decade, simply because of the proximity to this service. Next case study I want to talk about is Seattle Children's Hospital. Children's Hospital is consistently ranked one of the top 10 children's hospitals in the country. It's located in northeast Seattle. For those of you who are familiar with Seattle, it's kind of just north of the Laurelhurst neighborhood, so located to the northeast of the University District where the University of Washington is. Largely a residential area. It's located on a fairly major arterial Sandpoint Way, but the neighborhood's surrounding the hospital are very high-end, older Seattle neighborhoods, pretty high income levels, fantastic views of Lake Washington, which has been an issue as they've been going through this recent development process. They want to add 400 beds and expand about 2.4 million square feet of facility. It's been a very contentious process. We were hired to do the transportation management plan that was required as part of the development process. Transportation has been a major issue. This part of Seattle is extremely congested, Sandpoint Way, and a number of the 45th and a number of the streets that lead up to it are very congested areas of town. So we were challenged to come up with a very aggressive and innovative transportation program to go along with their development proposal. Some of the goals that were put forward by the transportation group related both to the hospital as well as impacts on the neighbors. So they wanted to, create attractive and beneficial improvements not just for the hospital but for the neighborhood in general. They wanted to make traveling without a car the preferred way to get to children. So there was a real level of commitment from the CEO of the hospital on down to make non-auto travel the best way to get there. And in doing so, build a healthier community, bring more transportation options to the neighborhood, and continue to enhance children's leadership role in transportation in the region. This clock right here, 12:30? Okay, that's helpful. So Children's decided to do a number of things to meet some very aggressive targets. The ultimate target was to, by 2015, have a mode split of no more than 30% drive alone, which is pretty impressive. Because they're not located in an urban village that's well served by transit, one of the key strategies we came up with was to create a shuttle system that provided sort of the last mile connection to transit. And we've already rolled out one route which goes directly to downtown and provides service both to the downtown transit tunnel and the 3rd Avenue Transit Mall and shoots directly to the hospital. In the works is another line that connects directly to the University District. This is where all the community transit express service comes in from Snohomish County to the north. Eventually hoping to provide some direct shuttle service to Snohomish County, where a lot of employees live, and to the Montlake flyer stops, which are the express ramps on the 520 bridge. The initial line that's been rolled out has been hugely successful. They're carrying about 500 commuters a day, basically making connections to the excellent transit service that comes into downtown. People previously would have had to make 2 or 3 transit connections to get to the hospital. Children's is very supportive of bike and pedestrian programs. They're working now with the University of Washington on a bike sharing pilot. They're hoping to roll this out within a year. This is, would be essentially kind of a 3rd generation bike sharing program like those you see in Paris or Europe. And I think there's now one in DC as well. This would allow people to access shared bikes, probably using their employee ID card, either on campus here or on the University of Washington. There's actually a lot of travel back and forth between the medical school and Children's Hospital. A program that Children's has already taken the initiative to implement. Children is the company bike program. Basically, they're offering any employee who commits to commuting by bicycle 3 days a week on average, any one of three bicycle options for free. So they're basically giving employees free bikes if they commit to commuting. And they've got kind of a nice range of urban cruiser to sort of more aggressive road bike, depending on what your preference is. They launched the first phase of this a couple months ago, and the first 100 bikes went like that, and they're just now launching the second phase, and I think they're pretty much tapped out on bikes before it's even launched. So, looking at the overall cost benefits, actually a relatively inexpensive program, and it's been very successful. As part of the development proposal, transportation management plan, The hospital has actually committed $2 million sort of above and beyond their other development costs as a condition of development approval. So assuming their development's approved in a couple months, they're actually going to provide $2 million in funding and run the contract management. The actual projects aren't set yet, although the talk to date has been a lot of that would go into bicycle boulevard development. You know, we have a great bike boulevard system here in Portland. Seattle has just built their first bike boulevard, so there's some great connections to the Burke-Gilman bike and ped trail here, but the connections to the neighborhoods aren't so great. So this funding would go to help improving bike access, not only for people coming to the hospital, but for the neighborhood in general. And Children's does a bunch of other stuff as well. I won't spend too much time on this, but they actually pay people not to drive. They provide a full flex pass, regional transit pass. They're going to start providing an additional $100 bonus for people who walk or bike to pick up, some sneakers or gear. And they provide, $250 per quarter to people who carpool and vanpool. The other thing that they spend a lot of time on is really investing in the urban realm around the campus, hoping that this will bring benefit to the neighbors, but also to encourage more people to walk and bike. The arterial that they're located on today has patchy sidewalks. It has the real feel of a suburban arterial with strip development, a lot of ingress and egress. So it's not the safest place to bike and walk. Part of that is a proposal to actually develop a joint children's shuttle, King County Metro public transit service center right on the main drag there. So they'd actually be building a facility that would bring a much higher level of amenities, nice shelters and passenger amenities, not only for their employees that are using their shuttle system, but also for the general public that's accessing King County Metro transit service that goes by and stops near the hospital. They're also in the process of implementing some transportation management software. There's a company out of Seattle called Goose Networks that does transportation monitoring and management software. They're implementing this now on campus. Right now, all their commute reporting is voluntary. This will actually allow them to carefully track parking garage access, shuttle access, to know what people's behavior are. That will, obviously makes their program hopefully a little bit more cost effective. But this Goose Networks also, allows people opportunities to track their use. And you probably can't read that, but there's an interactive website where you have your own homepage and you can see what your miles reduced are. You can see what your carbon emission impact is, and have more interactive tracking of what you're doing. The other issue that they're dealing with now as the economy declines is that there's a lot more demand for uncompensated care at the hospital. So one of their proposals with the system is they then allow people in their paycheck, rather than receiving their commute bonus, to contribute that to uncompensated care. So they're actually trying to kind of help out kids in need through this program as well. You can see that children's single occupant mode share is already extremely low, even for a relatively urban site. They have about 38% of people that commute by car today, and they've already dropped that significantly just in the first half of this decade. So kind of like Microsoft, getting that next increment is going to be a challenge, and that's why they've put together such an innovative program. Next site I want to talk a little bit about is Genentech. Genentech's a company in the Bay Area. They're located in South San Francisco. It's a fairly suburban location just north of the International Airport in San Francisco, which many of you have probably been to or through. If you're not familiar with the company, they're kind of famous for their cancer drugs. Have been very successful and have been growing quite a bit over the last several years. Again, this is a company that offers pretty good commute benefits to their employees, subsidized transit passes. They run shuttles from both BART and Caltrain stations near their site. They have their own express buses that run out of San Francisco. So they're providing a high level of commute options, but they need to do better. And the reason they need to do better is because they're developing, and they have some development agreements in place that require that they meet this 30% non-SOV mode split target by 2009. So part of the thinking from the transportation team was not only about what programs can we provide, but how can we market these programs, and what's our target demographic. So they put a lot of effort and hired a really good marketing company to work with the transportation team, and put a lot of effort into marketing and considering what groups they were going to hit. Ultimately, they came up with what they called their G-Ride program. So they have this fairly integrated marketing campaign, branding campaign, and internet user interface that interact to try and help them meet their goals. And a key part of what they were doing was trying to build a strong community of riders using some social networking applications and what they call generational marketing. What that means really is they decided that they'd go after the younger generation. They have a fair amount of young employees coming to work there. But they also figured that their dollars would be better spent trying to attract younger employees who are going to be around for a while, rather than attract the older employers who might be closer to retirement. So some of the components of that, they put a lot of effort into ride sharing. They created what they call Gene Pool, which is kind of their internet site that allowed for a lot of sort of interactive use amongst users. They really tried to make it kind of an on-campus social connection to their transportation program. They have an annual barbecue and tricycle race, and they provide some incentives through some things like the lunch box, which is kind of a pretty nifty, cool new hire kit with a bunch of swag in it. So since a lot of their employees they decided would best be served by ride sharing, what they tried to do was try and overcome some of the concerns that people typically have about ride sharing, and that is, who am I going to end up with? Is the ride going to be consistent? They spent a lot of time working on their intranet application and built a lot of flexibility into it, and built kind of a social networking component into it as well, thinking that the younger generation is much more accustomed to sort of getting to know people online rather than getting to know people face to face. So the detail that goes into signing up for a ride is pretty detailed and kind of laid out in more of a, I guess maybe more of a Facebook style than a traditional ride matching software style. They made it pretty easy to use, and really tried to sort of kind of create a dialogue, create more options for people by creating these social networking groups where people might be able to share rides with multiple people rather than being just tied into a single carpool or a single van pool. And as I said, sort of building relationships online that could help people find commute options. Again, they hold this big annual event on Bike to Work Day to really try and engender some more excitement on the campus about commuting. And they hit their goal. So they got their 30% goal by 2008. Another thing that they're pretty excited about is that about 40% of their full-time employees are reporting into the G-Ride system. Excuse me, at least once a month. There's pretty high level of activity. And this isn't you probably can't read this. This isn't actually tracking use, but it's tracking sort of frequency of use over time. So they've seen, over a couple years that the number of people who are using the system and using commute options frequently, which are the yellow lines, has increased. Of course, there's other motivations and benefits for the campus as well. Part of the reason that they put all this effort into this is they've been doing a lot of development. They've implemented a parking cash out as part of this sort of integrated commute program and incentives program. For those of you who aren't familiar with parking cash out, it's basically a system by where employees are compensated for giving up their parking space permanently or on a certain percentage of days. employees actually get a bonus in their paycheck if they're not using parking, and the company's not required to build that parking. As part of this, they were able to actually convince the city that they should drop the minimum parking requirements for the development. So typically, they'd be required to build, on the average, about 4 stalls per 1,000 square feet of new development. Because of the success of these programs, they've been able to build, depending on the use, anywhere from less than 1 to about 2.75. They figure that's about a $50 million cost savings to the company. So there is some benefit to providing these types of programs. Final program I want to talk a little bit about is a company called Humana. You're probably less likely to have heard of this one. But they're sort of a behind-the-scenes healthcare provider, actually a fairly large company. They provide corporate insurance packages and healthcare benefits. They have a fairly green and socially conscious mission. Some of their missions relate to corporate social responsibility, environmental activism, and human health. And developed a program a few years ago to help them provide transportation options for their employees in Louisville, Kentucky, but also to help meet some of those corporate goals. The name of their program is Freewheelin. You see here are some of their tenets of their corporate philosophy. Building better health, creativity, happiness amongst their employees. I'll skip over those quotes. So basically what Freewheelin is, though, is, again, a third-generation bike-sharing program for employees. The first one was implemented on their Louisville campus. Again, you can see they put a lot of effort into branding it and kind of making it part of their corporate image. They've got nice brochures. They've got swag kits that they give out to folks who participate. And again, they've created a really nice intranet site that pulls on some of the ideas of social marketing and brings those into commute, and in this case, bike sharing. So you can see here some of the things you can do on the site. You can do trip planning. You can map where you're looking to ride on a bike. They've got some pretty standardized infrastructure. This is one of the card stations where you'd punch your employee ID card if you wanted to get a bike out from a rack that looked like that. I'm sure this was a marketing shot and just not two people who were standing by the bikes. But again, back to their website, as you're using the system, either for commuting or for recreation or just for getting around town, it allows you to track your use. So the amount of miles you're using, the more you use it, the more points you get. And you can actually apply those points towards getting goods, bike gear, clothing. There's a health score application. Again, it's the health benefits company, so they're interested in the health of their employees. And part of this program is actually, thinking forward about tying human health into insurance costs. They provide insurance, so they want to provide companies with ways in which they can decrease their insurance costs, and sort of healthy living by design idea is one way that companies can do that. And they've tied it into carbon too, so people can kind of track their carbon score. So again, you can see all these things that are happening: route planning, rewards, recommended routes, so people can save routes online and then go back and look at where other people have traveled. People then can rate routes and say, hey, that's a good route, it's a bad route, it's safe. I didn't feel too good riding there. And then again, there's this sort of social networking place. So you can see, my friends, kind of like a Facebook, the Facebook of commuting. But this allows people to get together and kind of use this as part of their social networking opportunity, as well as how they commute and get around town. So that's it for the sort of 5 case studies I wanted to talk about. I'll just talk real quickly about the next piece and skip the rest of the slides. And that is, what do we do in going about calculating some of these program benefits, and what are the tools for doing that? A couple things I'd just point to, and you can dig into them further if you like. The EPA has something they call the commuter model, which is basically a spreadsheet model, but it's pretty well developed with some rigorous data from around the country that takes some learning to use, but any professional could figure it out. That's a great way to track future program commute benefits, whether you're looking for trip reduction, VMT reduction, and it also does carbon and emissions reduction calculations. EPA has another thing called the Benefits Calculator, which is an online application. It's kind of designed more for commute sites. It's really more of a web-based application that if you've got a work site and you're interested in finding out what your programs are, what the benefits of your programs are, pretty easy to use. One of the things that we spend a lot of time doing as consultants is helping people to think about the costs of future parking, not simply as if we're adding 4,000 employees, we need X number of parking spaces per employee onto infinity. But what's the different pro forma are around what's the cost of adding parking versus TDM versus subsidizing transit versus some of the other types of things that we talked about. So doing a little bit more integrated and complex pro forma around parking and TDM costs over time. A lot of companies are just tracking employee retention or tracking employee satisfaction through surveys to see how these programs are helping out. In general, a lot of these companies are interested in the buzz. Some of these programs have created a lot of buzz. They've created a lot of excitement amongst employees. They've created a lot of good publicity for the employers as well. And in some ways, that may be important as any quantifiable benefit that they can track. So I think I'll call it quits right there because we've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to leave some time for questions.
And before we do questions, don't forget to use your microphone or this microphone so that the online viewers can hear the question, and also the sign-in sheet I need. And so whoever, could you finish circulating that so that all the students sign it? Thank you.
Yeah. You had your hand up first, I think.
Okay. This is pretty much related to your last slide here, but in your experience, what would you say is the primary financial benefit to the companies? Is it better employee retention? Is it their corporate image? Is it some kind of benevolent environmentalism? Single occupancy?
Yeah, I think it's a mix. I think probably the one that most often gets quantified and is really used in calculating these costs is parking. On average, a structured parking space these days ranges anywhere from $20,000 to $60,000 per stall for construction, plus ongoing maintenance costs. So investing in a program where you're paying a limited amount to get somebody on a bike, a company bikes type program, and then being able to track the parking demand reduction associated with that, I think is probably the easiest way to kind of quantify and communicate these benefits. Things like employee retention. Not a lot of companies are sort of tracking what their transportation program impacts are on actual employee retention. They know there's probably some relationship there, but those things are more difficult to quantify. I'll go there.
Working at home because we have it as one of the benefits, but I just wonder what productivity level is.
Good question. There are studies out there. I'm not going to claim that telework is sort of my area of expertise. I know there's studies out there, and I know in general that there's sort of mixed results from that. One thing that a lot of employers are doing these days are actually creating buildings on campus that allow different types of telecommuters to also come to campus. So there's some employers that have buildings out there now that have everything ranging from kind of the corporate office you can use for the day if you're seeing employees to simple docking stations and meeting rooms that are available for people who are working at home but also need some space to hold a meeting I think some companies are kind of looking for the right balance of telework and bringing people onto campus too. And it also depends largely on the type of job. You know, if you're a programmer at a big tech company, you know, those types tend to work pretty closely and are very interactive. You know, if you're just doing payroll somewhere, it may be very well you can do it from your home office without, you know, missing the value of that interaction.
Are there any tax incentives or other government incentives for companies to do these programs?
There are tax incentives. I mean, there's employee tax incentives for that can be derived from, you know, some of the transit benefit type programs. I think there's tax incentive for employees for cycling that the rules haven't actually been written for yet, but are coming online. Depending on the state, there are some corporate tax benefit programs. There's the BETC program, Business Energy Tax Credit program here in Oregon that some employers have tapped into. So generally, yes. Is that the reason most of these companies are doing these things? No.
You mentioned that I think the Children's Hospital had a $2 million bicycle infrastructure investment as part of their development requirements. But was that $2 million directly quantified by bicycle trips, or are they like bicycle infrastructure directly related to the hospital, or is it more just kind of general and arbitrary?
It's really kind of an arbitrary number. There were a number of things that they had to do within their transportation management program to meet some specific trip reduction goals. You know, part of their focus was to implement programs that were going to get more people walking and get more people on bicycles. There was, you know, no stated commitment that they had to put money into public infrastructure that would do that. But, you know, the company or the institution has a pretty high level of investment, and they felt that, you know, putting out a pretty generous gift that would help improve safety for people that were cycling. They really liked the idea of trying to build a stronger bike boulevard system in the neighborhoods that surrounded them. So kind of an arbitrary number. It was a number that they felt was pretty generous, pretty kind of unprecedented in the Puget Sound and that type of development program. I don't think anybody's ever just, you know, offered to buy $2 million worth of bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. Go there and then here.
I'm just wondering, are these companies also using changes as part of the lease certification? Are they aiming for lease certification in any of these new campuses?
Yeah, certainly. You know, Children's Hospital, all their buildings will be LEED. Microsoft, I believe, is doing some level of LEED certification on most of their newer buildings. Genentech, I'm not sure, but it seems to be kind of becoming the standard, and certainly this is a piece of it. We've never had experience using the commuter model in real rural areas. You know, it's set up as a worksite model. So, you know, most of the data that's plugged into it is from urban or suburban area work sites. I'm not really, you know, there may be some tie to, you know, between the rural area and some of the suburban sites, but I'm not sure how effective it would be.
Showed some great examples of large companies that probably have the resources to get these sort of programs started.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if you might have some examples of, you know, mid-sized companies, and if they're not really maybe capable on their own, whether there's examples of companies that are clustered in one geographic location, sharing resources.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that certainly happens. You know, transportation management associations are a great vehicle for getting companies within a geographic area to participate in these types of programs. You know, one of the best ones in the country is the Lloyd District TMA right here in Portland. So they, you know, through that organization, they get a lot of smaller companies to buy into the benefit programs. There's certainly smaller companies. There's a small law firm in downtown Seattle that is a very similar company bikes program. to what the Children's Hospital has implemented. I think that's more of a cultural thing. They've got a lot of people who are cyclists and maybe road weenies, and they saw that as a great benefit for their people. In general, it's much more difficult financially for smaller companies to invest in these types of incentives. I think what you see within the smaller companies is they'll often kind of survey their employees and try and figure out what maybe the one or two most important benefit packages that would help with employee satisfaction, health, those types of mission-driven things. Again, a lot of the commute trip reduction laws are aimed at employees that employers that have 50 or 100 or more employees. So I think just having those laws in place really encourages the work sites to get something rolling, and often it kind of builds from there.
Now that you had a brief time to internalize the third generation alternative to driving, can you give us a little insight to maybe what the fourth generation look like? Is if that's around?
I do think that some of what you're seeing here is use of social marketing in the sort of computer application. There's a lot of applications that are coming online that will allow people via their PDAs to do PDAs and GPS to do sort of much more dynamic ride sharing. In fact, a lot of those applications actually exist. They're being used a little bit in the Bay Area and a few other places. I expect that over time, as those become more popular, there'll be a lot more dynamic ways for people to match rides or get hooked into small shuttle van type services that aren't stopping at fixed stops but are actually responding to where people are in real time. But I would guess that maybe that's sort of the next generation of what we might see.
In your introduction, first, thank you for your great presentation. In your presentation, one of the issues you brought up was unsafe walking and biking. I'm interested in collaboration between public and private sectors. What can we do as an example of that? Make biking, walking friendly here in Lagos. That's a route that I'm familiar with.
Right.
Impossible to bike.
Right. That's a good point. I think even some of the companies we've talked about here are making fairly substantial investments in infrastructure. For Microsoft, their campus is severed by State Route 520, which is a major 6-8 lane highway, and there's actually only one. They have about half their population on one side of the campus and half on the other. There's only one crossing, and there's freeway ramps that come onto the crossing, so it's kind of a terrible place to cross. That's where people are forced to do so. They're actually funding a good chunk of a public bridge that's being constructed a little bit south that will provide another connection between their campuses. I think the Children's Hospital example is a good example of where a private institution would be interested in kind of improving bicycle safety. So there's definitely good examples out there. I think you need to find institutions or corporations that have deep enough pockets to to be able to go there. But helping to quantify some of the overall system benefits in terms of reduction on the public road system, I think can be helpful in kind of forming some of those partnerships.
Well, before we thank Tom for his great presentation, I want to remind you that next Friday, Franz Lowenhertz from the city of Bellevue, Washington, will be speaking about asset management for ADA compliance using advanced technologies. So thanks to all of you for coming, and let's thank Tom for his presentation.
Thank you. Let's stick around for a few minutes if anyone has any other questions. Oh, thanks. Nice to meet you. Yeah. I can turn this off.